So now, speaking directly to coalitions, how can coalitions support programs who are in the process of changing policies and practices to better support survivors who use substances?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first place to start is to have the conversation, both internally, right? Because the folks in the coalition are the ones that are doing oftentimes outreach to the programs in the state so that they're aware, they're using the right language, they're helping, provide the most recent and helpful resources, can provide appropriate TA, but also holding the conversations with programs, with advocates, providing support with policy development and training on how to shift the mindset that exists around substance use. It's also really critical that we include survivors in the conversation, making sure that we're asking what we can do to make our spaces better, to feel more safe, to feel more supportive for them, and identify community resources that may be missing to fill the gaps. Right. So, thinking about training EMS responders, thinking outside the box of who our partners should be or what they have looked like in the past to, again, create more, build a larger community for folks to engage in outside of that traditional, like, let's call the police, let's call rehab, let's call crisis. We need to move away from that thinking because it's siloed and it's harmful. So we need to expand what that looks like and bring in other members of the community. And it's also really important to be mindful to help unpack secondary trauma and transference and implicit bias and stigma around substance use so that we can really diminish the impact it has on survivors and provide support for advocates, right? So providing resources around substance use. I know at the coalition, we just created a substance use wheel. We updated the one that exists because it's extremely gendered. It's focused only on recovery. So we updated ours to reflect what we're seeing and what our programs need. So we have that and we sent that to our programs. Also in thinking about how it intersects with mental health, right? How that can show up. And also if you hold any marginalized identity, how this also coincides with that. All of these experiences all work together, really understanding that so that we're not making, blanket statements, but we're making meaningful education for programs. So it's really important that, again, we do work internally to understand, but also then taking that external and helping programs what they need.
Yes. I would love to see the resources you've developed. And if you'd like to share any of them on the Shelter Hub, I'd love to link to your website so that people can check them out. And they sound great. And then as we wrap up our conversation, what other tips and resources would you like to share with coalitions, with advocates, with programs as they embark on this journey?
Yeah, really, it's important to unpack the idea of what is and isn't a liability, right? Because at least that's been our struggle the most of like, it's a liability. Again, what is that? What does that mean? Says who? Let's actually figure it out instead of relying on this, like we've always done it kind of harmful idea and really challenging what that looks like. Is this actually a liability? The answer is usually no. And really understanding, we can't be all things to all people, and that's okay, right? But what we can do is build meaningful relationships outside of, again, these siloed ideas of what responses should be of like, let's call crisis, let's call the police, let's call recovery, and expand that out into harm reduction, into partnering agencies, asking what the survivor finds important. Maybe they're disconnected from their spirituality and linking them with something that like with a church or, a group that they, are missing, and that may help aid them in something that they want. It's also really important, and we took this from your training, which we kind of like live by at this point, that uncomfortable does not equal unsafe. Mm-hmm. And that's really a big thing we're working on with advocates as well as ourselves at the coalition to really understand that. It can feel very scary to witness somebody using like a maladaptive coping skill or witnessing a trauma response, an activator occur. But that doesn't mean they're unsafe necessarily. It doesn't mean what they're doing is necessarily unsafe. They've kept themselves safe before they got to us. They know how to keep them safe moving forward. But what we can do is provide more opportunity to expand their relationships, expand their connections, find additional support and additional resources that they didn't know existed or didn't have access to before coming to us. And that's really what we're here to do. And most importantly is that recovery isn't the only option. Not everyone's interested in it, or not everyone needs it. This idea of engaging in substance use means, oh, time to, go into recovery. That is not true. We need to break away from this binary thinking as a whole, preferably, but specifically around this, and to use their guidance, right? To allow the survivor to guide and not our own, right? We're here to walk alongside or behind, not in front of and pulling along. So it's really important that we're centering survivors in this and really just doing our own education, putting in our own work to really understand what this looks like, what the needs can look like, how this intersects with other identities, how this all relates into trauma and the experience of domestic violence, and then how to move forward with survivors.
Yes, powerful. There's so much there. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of these experiences and strategies with us. There's so much here for programs and coalitions and advocates to start putting into practice. So powerful, everything that you've shared with us today. And thank you so much for tuning in. And Jessa, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all of this great information with us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone.